now we will be understanding something related to comments. Now in the previous one we have discussed about how do we get the data which is pre-created into our SQL workbench, which was there, the MySQL workbench. Now we have a data with us. We will be proceeding further in terms of writing certain queries for report generation, for data pre-processing, for data manipulation as such. But there is one more important component which needs to be studied, which needs to be understood, which is nothing but comments. Now what is a comment? Imagine that I have written a query and that query needs to be having some informative statements. That is, the query is related to filtering the data. The query helps you to gather this kind of outcomes. I don't want that data or that information which I have shared into my SQL to be understood by the systems. It is just for the human understanding purpose. Or let's say I have written multiple SQL statements or SQL queries and I don't want to implement some of them. So what I can do in order of that? In order of that, I can do something called as comments. Now what are comments? Comments are just the statements for human to understand, for human to interpret, to make your queries, to make your solutions appropriate, to add an informative part, also not for the systems to understand and not for the systems to execute. So let's see how to write certain comments. So there are two ways of writing comments. One is a single line comment and the another is nothing but a multi-line comment. Now what is a single line comment? What is a multi-line comment? Let's try to understand that. Now this is what we have done in the last class, and as you can see with the blue symbol which is being mentioned, these were the comments. But let me talk more upon those comments, as let us see how those comments will be helpful in order to solve certain analysis for the same, or how that will be helpful in terms of adding a beneficial part into my queries. So if I zoom in over here, you can see something I have written with the help of hash, something I have written with the help of two comments or two hyphens as such. So what are those and why a computer does not understand the same? So let's say here in the schema part, you can observe that none of the database is selected. So let's try to select the database with the help of query, and let me write the comments over here. So I want to write a comment, that is, I'm doing a work related to selecting the classic models database, that whatever analysis I do will be related to the classic model database. So what I need to do over here is I can write two hyphens and with a space. So when you give two hyphens and a space, it will be acting as what? A comment. Now I can write select the classic models database, as we have done in the last class. So when you are writing something into this manner, what is this called as? What is this known as? This is known as a comment. Comment means an information, an extra thing with your queries, which is just for a human to interpret. That is for me. If I am sharing this file with someone else, whatever I have written above the query or with the query, they will understand, okay, this is a comment. This is something which this query is performing. So if I want to select the database, now see, select database, which means I have to use the database. Whenever databases needs to be selected, you don't have to write select. You always have to write something called as use. So here I'll write use. Now as said, SQL is not case sensitive. The meaning of not case sensitive means if you write use in this manner or in small case, it's fine. You can write anyhow. Just writing the query correctly is important. So use what? I'm going to use which database over here? That is nothing but classic models. So when I do this, when you write a query and you know that the query is completed, you put up a semicolon. That is known as a terminator. That is, it states that the query has ended. So the next query will begin after this. So I have written this. Now what you can do in terms of running it, you can put in your cursor anywhere within that terminator and with a shortcut key known as Control Enter, you can execute, and you can see in the output action that this query has been executed successfully with a green icon. And you can also see when to know that the database is selected. In the schematic part, you can see the database name is in bold format, which means that the database is being selected. So this is a query which I have written. Now imagine that if I go over here, if I select this, let's say I have selected this part and I try to run. You all know that there are two statements of running the data. Let's say I execute over here. It's not running what I've written, select the classic models. It is executing what? The above query which was there. It is not executing this particular statement because this particular statement is not for the computer to understand. It is just for the human understanding as such. So here, if you can see, that's done. Now, if I write hash. Now, with hash also, I can write a comment. Now, what comment? Show all the tables in the selected database. In the selected database. So, if I take this query and execute it, see what is being executed in the output section. If I select this, I press Control Enter, that is also fine, or I can click on this flash symbols. Let's say I click on this where it executes one query. What has been executed? As you can see, use classic models. Why? Because this is not a query. This is just a comment. This is just for the user. So above this, what is a query? Classic model. So that is being executed. You can see in the output section. So what are these comments? So you can write one-line comments. The comments which are in one line are known as one-line comments. Now if you write this, classic models is a pre-created database. If I write something like this, you can see there is an error. Why there is an error? If you go over here, let's say if you go over here, classic models is not valid at this position, which means whatever you have written, the position is not valid. The SQL statement does not start in this manner. There will be certain keywords which needs to be used when an SQL statements, or we can call it queries, are being published or are being written or are being executed. So this is an incorrect way. So if you run this, if you try to run this, if you try to select this and execute it, from this you can execute. So you can see classic model is a pre-created database. You have an error in the SQL syntax. So whenever this kind of syntactical error comes, which means the writing pattern is incorrect. So this is not how the query is written, and this is obviously not a query. This is obviously not an SQL statement to be executed. It is just for the human understanding. So I can put it into comments. So how I can put it into comments? I can either give a hash, which is very similar to the Python language, which you will be studying in the field of data science, or particularly with respect to SQL, if I give double hyphen and space. So this is known as one line comment. So in each line, a comment would be written. So this was all about a one line comment. But what if I want to write multiple comments, which means I have a big paraphrase, I have big set of sentence, or I have a proper paragraph to be written into my comment. So what I can do is, I can write those paragraphs also into comments. So imagine here, I say that I want to write that SQL is a primary language for all databases. Let's say, let's write the functionalities of SQL or features of SQL. So if I want to write multiple statements, like SQL is a primary language for all RDBMS. Now if I want to write another comment in next line, so what I have to do, SQL is similar to simple English. which means it's very similar to the simple English language. So if I want to write another comment in another line, I have to write again a statement of either hash or two hyphens. So this is one of the comment. But for each line, I don't want to give this. I want to add a multi-line comment without adding hyphens or hashes in each line. So what I can do, I can write a multi-line comment in another format. So when you have multiple lines of comments, a paraphrase or a big set of comments to be added, you'll write what? Slash star. That is the start of the comment. You can see it's starting the comment. This is ending the comment. Let's say I give features of SQL, which is there, and you can see when you close this, this is a feature. So if I write use or show tables, if I write show tables as a query, it's not a query now. It's what? It's a comment. Why it's a comment? If I execute this with control enter, you can see use classic models is only being executed. The show tables part is not being executed. The reason over here is it is acting as a comment. Why? Because the comment starting has happened with slash and star, but it has not ended. So here you can see whatever you write in that particular part is a comment. Now I'll write SQL is not case sensitive. You can see. And I want to end the comments over here. So you have started the multi-line comment with slash and star. You'll end it with star and slash. So in the reverse order, you will end it. So here you can see that from this to this is a multi-line comment, means multiple lines of comment written at once without adding multiple hyphens or hashes. And you can see, you can minimize and maximize this part. So all of this is what? All of this is a comment just for the human understanding. And you can see this is a query. I do control enter. It will show me all the tables which are there into that database. So if I put hyphen on the same, so it will be acting as a comment. So what is a comment? If you want to make your queries informative, or if you require your queries to be not executed for a particular part or for a particular operation, you can add it into a comment. So comments are something for a user to understand, not for the machine to interpret and execute. So I hope you have understood what are comments, what are simple comments or one-liner comments, or what are multi-line comments. So this was all about comments and the operations related to comments. We will be using comments in the later part of clauses and many more topics which we will be using. So I hope this is clear with everyone.